The day James Harmon fixed billionaire Roland Fitzgerald's golden faucet should have been just another job, but when Fitzgerald mocked the 52-year-old plumber's simple skills and bet $100,000 no tradesman could repair the catastrophic plumbing. Failure aboard the USS Defender, a nuclear submarine crippled in port with baffled Navy engineers working around the clock. James shocked everyone by accepting the challenge, stepping aboard with nothing but his worn leather toolbox and the photo of his beloved daughter tucked inside, completely unaware that solving this impossible puzzle would transform him from an overlooked handyman into the most respected mechanical expert in the Navy, create groundbreaking opportunities for struggling youth across Maine, and ultimately place him face to face with Admiral Douglas Fletcher in the Pentagon, discussing how a plumber's practical wisdom had changed military engineering forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The USS Defender sat motionless in the Newport Naval Station, its massive black hull gleaming under the morning sun. Inside, engineers in crisp uniforms huddled around blueprints and computer screens, their faces etched with frustration. Lieutenant Christine Woods wiped sweat from her brow as she stared at the mess of pipes before her. 3 weeks, and we're no closer to fixing it, she said to Commander Benjamin Parker, who stood beside her, arms crossed over his chest. The water purification system is completely compromised. We've replaced every component twice. Parker nodded grimly. Admiral, Fletcher is breathing down my neck. This submarine was supposed to deploy next month. 100 miles away in Port Haven, Maine, James Harmon knelt under a marble sink, his weathered hands working with practiced precision on a gold-plated faucet. Water dripped onto his forehead as he tightened a valve. The immaculate bathroom gleamed around him, a stark contrast to his worn jeans and faded flannel shirt. "Almost done, Mr. Fitzgerald," he called out. Roland Fitzgerald appeared in the doorway, a tall man in a tailored suit, checking his platinum watch impatiently. His summer mansion overlooked the Atlantic, a glass and steel monument to wealth that required constant maintenance. "This is the third time I've had you out this month, Harmon," Fitzgerald said, his voice tinged with the boredom of the perpetually wealthy. "For what they charged for these fixtures, you'd think they'd work properly." James slid out from under the sink and stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "The problem wasn't the fixtures, sir. Your water pressure is too high for these delicate components. I've installed a regulator that should solve it permanently." Fitzgerald raised an eyebrow. "A simple solution for a simple problem, I suppose." "That's all you tradesmen do, isn't it? Follow instructions written by your betters." The comment stung, but James maintained his professional demeanor. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Fitzgerald?" "Yes, actually." Fitzgerald gestured toward the living room. "Come have a drink. I'm expecting guests." James followed reluctantly. In the vast living room with its wall of windows facing the ocean, 3 men in naval uniforms stood admiring the view. James recognized Admiral Douglas Fletcher from the newspaper, the commander of the naval base down in Newport. "Gentlemen, this is my plumber," Fitzgerald announced, with the casual ownership of a man accustomed to treating service workers as possessions. "Fix my faucet, though we'll see for how long." The officers nodded politely, but their faces betrayed distraction. Fletcher looked particularly grim. "Still having trouble with the Defender?" Fitzgerald asked, pouring himself a scotch without offering one to James. "Nothing we can't handle," Fletcher replied curtly. 3 weeks in port for a plumbing issue," Fitzgerald chuckled. $3 billion of taxpayer technology, and you're defeated by pipes." James stood awkwardly, toolbox in hand, unsure if he was dismissed. The conversation clearly wasn't meant for him, but Fitzgerald had yet to pay him. "It's not just pipes," said one of the younger officers, despite a warning glance from Fletcher. It's an integrated water system with complex purification components. The contamination is spreading through multiple subsystems. Sounds like a backflow problem, James murmured, almost to himself. The room fell silent. 4 pairs of eyes turned. To him. What was that? Fletcher asked. James shifted uncomfortably. Sorry, sir, just thinking aloud. No, go on, Fletcher insisted, suddenly interested. Well, without seeing it, I couldn't say for sure, James hesitated. But when contamination spreads through connected systems despite component replacement, it usually means you've got backward, pressure pushing contaminants where they shouldn't go. Fitzgerald laughed. Look at that. My plumber thinks he can solve what your engineers can't. The Admiral didn't laugh. He studied James with newfound intensity. You work on systems this complex often, Mr. Harmon, James Harmon. And no, sir, nothing like a submarine, but principles of water and pressure are universal. Fitzgerald's eyes suddenly gleamed with the look of a man seeing an opportunity for amusement. I've just had a brilliant idea. Why don't you let Harmon here take a look? Might be worth a laugh. This isn't a joke, Roland, Fletcher said sternly. That submarine is critical to national security. Then make it interesting, Fitzgerald pressed, the alcohol making him bolder. I'll bet $100,000 that no plumber, no matter how experienced, could fix what's wrong with your submarine. Fletcher's expression darkened. We don't have time for games. It's not a game if there's something at stake, Fitzgerald insisted. If he fails, I donate $100,000 to the Navy Relief Society. If by some miracle he succeeds, you name what you want. James found his voice. Sir, I should be going. What do you say, Harmon? Fitzgerald interrupted. Care to prove that tradesmen aren't just following instructions written by their betters? The room fell silent again. James felt the weight of all eyes upon him. He thought of his daughter Lauren's picture in his wallet, of their phone call last night, where she'd sounded so tired from working double shifts at the Marine Research Lab. He thought of Scott, his apprentice, struggling to pay rent while learning. The trade. If I did this, James said slowly, and I succeeded, I wouldn't want your money, Mr. Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald looked surprised. Then what? A fully funded apprenticeship program for kids who can't afford trade school but have the talent. Your name on it, of course. Fletcher exchanged glances with his officers, then looked back at James. You really think you could help? I don't know, James answered honestly, but I've been solving water flow problems for 30 years. I'm willing to try if you'll let me. The next morning found James standing at the Newport Naval Station security checkpoint, clutching his toolbox and wondering what madness had possessed him. A young ensign approached. Mr. Harmon, I'm to escort you to the Defender. As they walked toward the massive submarine, James felt his confidence wavering. What had seemed like a moment of justified pride yesterday now felt like foolish overreach. He was just a plumber from a small coastal town. What did he know about nuclear submarines? At the gangway, Commander Parker waited with Lieutenant Woods. Their expressions made it clear they considered this a waste of time. Mr. Harmon, Parker said stiffly, Admiral Fletcher informed me of your visit. I want to be clear, you'll be escorted at all times. You'll touch nothing without permission, and this is highly irregular. Christine Woods didn't bother hiding her skepticism. We've had 16 engineers working on this problem, Mr. Harmon, people with advanced degrees and years of specialized training. James nodded, understanding their position. I appreciate the opportunity, ma'am. I'm not here to step on toes, just to offer a different perspective. Follow me, Woods said curtly, turning toward the submarine's hatch. As James ducked through the hatch and descended into the submarine, the familiar world of residential plumbing fell away. The narrow corridors, the humming of equipment, the complex maze of pipes and valves. It was overwhelming. Crew members stopped to stare as he passed, some smirking at the civilian with a toolbox. They arrived at a section cordoned off with yellow tape. Behind a panel, a mass of pipes and components glistened with moisture. The air smelled wrong, metallic and slightly sour. "This is one of 4 purification stations," Woods explained. "We've replaced every component, checked every connection. The contamination persists and spreads." James set down his toolbox and studied the system. Despite its complexity, he recognized the fundamental principles at work: water under pressure, seeking the path of least resistance. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the panel. Woods nodded reluctantly. James knelt and ran his fingers along the pipes, feeling rather than seeing. His mind worked through the system, tracing pathways, understanding flow. He closed his eyes, visualizing the water's journey through the submarine. "Can I see the blueprints for the connected systems?" he asked. Parker looked surprised, but nodded. To Woods, who produced a tablet with detailed schematics, James studied them carefully, his finger tracing lines across the screen. "The problem isn't here," he said finally. "We've checked the entire water system," Woods replied, irritation evident in her voice. "Not the water system," James said, looking up. "The air system." Parker frowned. "They're separate systems." "On paper, yes," James agreed. "But look here." He pointed to a junction on the blueprint. "Your water purification backs up to the atmospheric control system. They share this bulkhead and the pressure differential." He stood suddenly. "I need to see this section here." 3 decks, and 2 hours later, James stood in a cramped maintenance tunnel, his flashlight illuminating a section of piping that connected to a large tank. "This is it," he said softly. Chief Petty Officer Antonio Reyes, who had joined their group, looked skeptical. "What exactly are we looking at?" James pointed to a hairline fracture in a valve housing. "This valve is part of the atmospheric humidity control system. When it fails, it creates negative pressure in the connected chamber, which pulls water from the adjacent purification system through micro-fractures in the shared wall." The officers exchanged glances. "That's impossible to detect," Wood said. "The systems aren't supposed to interact." "But they do," James replied simply. "Water always finds a way, especially when pressure differentials exist. Replace this valve, seal the fractures in the shared housing, and rebalance the pressure in both systems." Parker looked unconvinced. "That can't be the entire problem." "It's not," James agreed. "Once contamination began, it created a cascade. Effect. You'll need to flush both systems completely, but this is where it started." That evening, as James sat alone in a small naval station cafeteria, Admiral Fletcher approached his table. "Mind if I join you?" James gestured to the empty chair. "Of course not, sir." Fletcher studied him curiously. "Commander Parker tells me they're implementing your solution, said it might actually work." "The principles aren't complicated," James said. "Just hard to see if you're not looking in the right place." "Why a plumber, Mr. Harmon? With your mind, you could have been an engineer." James sipped his coffee. "My father was a plumber. His father, too. There's honor in it." "There is," Fletcher agreed, "but not much recognition." "Never needed any." Fletcher nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you might get some now, whether you want it. Or not. If this works, Roland Fitzgerald will owe you that apprenticeship program." James smiled slightly. "That's all I want out of this. A chance for kids like my apprentice Scott to learn a trade without the debt." "Noble goal," Fletcher said, standing. "We'll know by morning if you've succeeded." As Fletcher walked away, James pulled out his phone and called his daughter. "Hey, Lauren," he said when she answered. "You'll never believe where I am right now. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Next morning, James arrived at the submarine to find a different atmosphere. The skeptical glances had been replaced with curious stares. Lieutenant Woods approached him, her previous coldness noticeably thawed. "Your theory was correct," she admitted, handing him a clipboard with test results. The atmospheric control valve was creating negative pressure that pulled contaminants through microfractures in the shared bulkhead. "We've replaced the valve and sealed the fractures as you suggested." James nodded, scanning the results. "And the flush. In progress now. Preliminary tests show significant improvement in water quality." Commander Parker joined them, extending his hand to James. "Mr. Harmon, I owe you an apology. I was quick to dismiss your expertise." James shook his hand firmly. "No apology needed, Commander. It's a complex system." "That's just it," Parker said, gesturing for James to follow him. "The complexity is precisely what blinded our engineers. They were looking at each subsystem in isolation, following standard troubleshooting protocols." They walked through the narrow corridors of the submarine, crew members nodding respectfully as they passed. James felt oddly out of place in his flannel shirt and work boots amid the uniforms. "Admiral Fletcher would like to see you," Parker said as they approached the command center. "He's been monitoring our progress closely." Inside the command center, Admiral Fletcher was engaged in a heated phone conversation. When he saw James, he quickly ended the call. "Mr. Harmon, excellent timing. I've just been speaking with our friends at the Pentagon." Fletcher's expression was hard to read. "Your solution worked. The contamination levels are dropping hourly. We expect the Defender to be fully operational within 48 hours. James felt a wave of relief. "That's good news, Admiral. More than good. It's remarkable. Our engineers estimated another 3 weeks minimum." Fletcher gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I'd like to discuss something with you." James sat cautiously, sensing a shift in the air. Chief Petty Officer Antonio Reyes entered, carrying a stack of folders. "These are reports from 5 other submarines in our fleet," Fletcher explained as Reyes laid the folders on the table. "All experiencing similar contamination issues, though less severe than the Defender. Different shipyards, different maintenance crews, but identical systems." James looked at the folders but didn't reach for them. "A design flaw, then?" "Precisely." Fletcher nodded. "The valve you identified, it's standard across the Virginia class. The microfractures in the shared housing develop over time due to the pressure differential you described." "Easy enough to fix," James said. "Redesign the valve housing with proper pressure compensation and reinforce the shared bulkhead." Fletcher exchanged glances with Parker. "Our engineers are developing a solution now based on your insights, but I'd like your input on their designs." James hesitated. "Admiral, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm just a plumber. Your engineers have the training for this kind of work." "Yet you solved in hours what they couldn't in weeks," Fletcher countered. "Sometimes formal training creates blind spots. You see the systems differently." Before James could respond, the command center door opened and Roland Fitzgerald strode in, followed by 2 naval officers struggling to keep pace. "Is it true?" Fitzgerald demanded, his eyes finding James. "He actually fixed it." Fletcher stood, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Mr. Fitzgerald, this is a restricted area." "I have temporary clearance," Fitzgerald waved dismissively. "I want to know if I've lost my bet." "You have," Fletcher confirmed coldly. "Mr. Harmon's solution was correct. The submarine will be operational ahead of schedule." Fitzgerald stared at James with newfound interest. "Well, I'll be damned. A plumber fixed a nuclear submarine." He didn't sound entirely displeased, more intrigued, as if discovering a rare specimen. "I believe you owe Mr. Harmon his prize," Fletcher reminded him. "The apprenticeship program," Fitzgerald nodded. Yes, a deal's a deal. I'll have my people set it up." He approached James, extending his hand. "Impressive work, Harmon. Perhaps I underestimated what a man with practical knowledge can accomplish." James stood and shook his hand, uncomfortable with the attention but committed to his goal. The program is what matters, Mr. Fitzgerald. Kids who want to learn trades deserve the opportunity. And they'll have it, Fitzgerald assured him, his entrepreneurial mind already calculating angles. In fact, I'm thinking bigger than we initially discussed. With your permission, I'd like to make this a significant initiative. The Fitzgerald Harmon Trade Scholarship has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? James was taken aback. That's not necessary. But it is excellent publicity, Fitzgerald grinned. A charitable program with a remarkable story behind it. The press will eat it up. Speaking of press, Fletcher interrupted, I should remind everyone that the details of the Defender's systems are classified. The general story can be told, but no technical specifics. Fitzgerald waved his hand dismissively. Of course. The narrative is what matters anyway. Humble Plumber saves the day. It's irresistible. James felt increasingly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. He hadn't done this for recognition or to become part of Fitzgerald's public relations strategy. If there's nothing else, Admiral, he said, I should be getting back to Port Haven. I have jobs scheduled for tomorrow. Fletcher seemed to sense his discomfort. Actually, there is one more thing. The Navy would like to offer you a temporary consulting position. 6 weeks to help implement your solution across the fleet and advise on the redesign. James blinked in surprise. A consulting position? For me? With appropriate compensation, of course, Fletcher added. Your expertise would be invaluable. James thought of his small plumbing business, of Scott, who was just learning the trade, of his regular customers who depended on him. But he also thought of the opportunity to contribute something significant, to be valued for his knowledge. I'd need to make arrangements, James said carefully. My apprentice would have to handle the scheduled jobs. We'll accommodate your schedule as much as possible, Fletcher assured him, and perhaps your apprentice could benefit from the experience as well. Before James could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. A text from Lauren. Dad, what's going on? Just got a call from a reporter asking about you and a submarine. Problems? Fletcher asked, noting his expression. My daughter, James explained. Somehow news is already spreading. Fitzgerald smiled smugly. I may have mentioned something to a contact at the Portland Press Herald. Human interest stories. Move quickly. James rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed by how rapidly events were unfolding. 24 hours ago, he'd been fixing a gold-plated faucet, just another invisible service worker. Now he was being offered a Navy consulting position, while his name was apparently in the news. I need some air, he said honestly. Of course, Fletcher nodded. Chief Reyes will escort you. Outside on the dock, James stared at the enormous black hull of the USS Defender. Reyes stood nearby, respectfully giving him space but remaining within sight. Quite a view, isn't it? Said a female voice behind him. James turned to find Lieutenant Woods approaching. It is, he agreed. Hard to believe what's inside, all those systems working together, or failing together, she added with a small smile, coming to stand beside him. You know, when Commander Parker told me a plumber was coming to help, I was skeptical. Understandably, James said. No, not understandably, she corrected herself. I was prejudiced. I assumed that because you didn't have the same credentials as our engineers, you couldn't possibly understand the complexity involved. James shrugged. Different paths to knowledge, that's all. Woods looked at him curiously. Where did you learn to think about systems that way? The interconnectedness, the pressure dynamics? 30 years of fixing problems, James said simply. When you've crawled under enough houses and into enough basements, you start to see patterns. Water, air, pressure, they follow the same principles everywhere. You should teach, she suggested. Not just apprentices, but engineers too. There's a gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application that someone like you could bridge. James laughed softly. I'm not sure your engineering professors would appreciate a plumber in their classrooms. Maybe they should. Woods replied seriously. "I have 2 engineering degrees, and I missed what you saw immediately." James's phone buzzed again. Another text from Lauren. "Dad, seriously, call me. What's going on?" "I need to call my daughter," James said, pulling out his phone. Woods nodded. "Of course. And Mr. Harmon, thank you. What you did here matters." As she walked away, James dialed Lauren's number, preparing himself for a difficult explanation. "Dad," Lauren answered immediately. "What's this about you fixing a submarine? There's a reporter from the Portland Press-Herald saying you saved a nuclear submarine that Navy engineers couldn't fix." "It's a long story," James sighed. "I was at a client's house, and there were Navy officers there discussing problems with the submarine's water system. I made a suggestion, and somehow ended up here at Newport Naval Station." "And you actually fixed it?" Lauren sounded incredulous. "It was a plumbing problem, Law. Complex system, but familiar principles." There was a pause on the line. "Dad, that's amazing." The pride in her voice warmed him. Lauren had always respected his work, but there had always been a subtle divide between them. Her world of academic achievement and research, and his world of practical trades. "The Navy's offered me a consulting position," he told her. 6 weeks to help implement the solution across multiple submarines." "You're taking it, right?" Lauren asked immediately. "I don't know. My business. Scott can handle it," Lauren interrupted. "Dad, this is incredible. You have to do this." "There's more," James added. "The man who made the bet, Roland Fitzgerald, he's going to fund an apprenticeship program. He's calling it the Fitzgerald Harmon Trade Scholarship." "Your name on a scholarship program?" Lauren sounded delighted. "Dad, everything's changing." Everything was indeed changing, and much faster than James was comfortable with. He stared out at the water, watching seagulls circle above the harbor. "Will you come visit me in Newport if I take this position?" he asked, suddenly wanting his daughter's presence amid all this upheaval. "Try and stop me," Lauren replied. "I want to hear every detail, and Dad, I'm really proud of you." After ending the call, James stood silently for several minutes. Chief Reyes maintained his respectful distance, occasionally checking his watch. "Chief," James called finally, "I'm ready to go back in." Inside, he found Admiral Fletcher alone, in a small conference room. "I'll take the consulting position," James told him without preamble. "But I have conditions." Fletcher gestured for him to continue. "My apprentice, Scott Bailey, comes with me. He handles our scheduled jobs, but also learns alongside me here. And I need Thursdays off to return to Port Haven and check on critical customers." Fletcher considered this. "Reasonable terms. We can arrange appropriate clearances for your apprentice." "One more thing," James added. "I don't want any publicity seeking me out at home. Port Haven is a small town. I value my privacy." "That I can't fully control," Fletcher admitted, "especially with Fitzgerald involved, but we'll minimize your personal exposure as much as possible." James nodded, knowing it was the best he could hope for. "When do we start?" "How's tomorrow?" Fletcher asked. "We'd like you to begin with a briefing to our engineering team, help them understand your approach." The thought of presenting to a room full of naval engineers made James's stomach tighten, but he nodded. "I'll need a whiteboard and marker. I explain better when I can draw." "Whatever you need," Fletcher assured him. "And James, this is the beginning of something important, not just for the Navy, but for rethinking how we approach technical education and problem solving." The following day, James found himself back in Port Haven, parked outside Scott's apartment building. The modest 3-story structure needed paint and repairs, but the rent was affordable for a young man on an apprentice's wages. James had called ahead, but he still felt anxious about what he was about to propose. Scott had been with him for 3 years, a troubled kid who'd found purpose in the precision and problem-solving of plumbing work. Now James was about to disrupt the steady routine they'd established. Scott opened the door, his expression curious. At 24, he was lean and wiry, with calloused hands that showed his commitment to the trade. "Boss, what's going on? Your text said it was important." James took a deep breath. "Can I come in?" Inside Scott's small apartment, James explained. The events of the past 2 days, the bet, the submarine, the valve failure, and the consulting offer. Scott listened with growing amazement. "You fixed a nuclear submarine? That's insane." "It wasn't the nuclear part," James clarified, "just the water systems. But yes, I found a problem their engineers had missed. And now they want you as a consultant. That's incredible." Scott's enthusiasm was genuine, without a trace of envy. "That's what I need to talk to you about," James continued. "I've accepted the position, but only on condition that you come with me." Scott's eyes widened. "Me? On a submarine?" "Working alongside me, learning the systems, and also handling our regular clients here in Port Haven. It would mean more responsibility, more hours, but also more pay and an incredible learning opportunity." Scott was silent for a moment, processing the offer. "You think I'm ready for that? Running jobs on my own?" "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't," James said honestly. "You've learned more in 3 years than most apprentices do in 5. You have good instincts." Pride bloomed on Scott's face. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow. Pack for a few days. We'll drive down to Newport together in the morning." As James turned to leave, Scott called after him. "Mr. Harmon, thank you for believing in me. Not many people have." James thought of his own journey, of the countless times he'd been underestimated or overlooked because he worked with his hands rather than a computer. That's the thing about this trade, Scott. The pipes don't care about your background or your credentials. They only care if you understand how they work. Driving home, James felt both excitement and trepidation about the path ahead. His quiet life was about to change dramatically. For 30 years, he'd been just another working man, invisible to the wealthy and powerful who relied on his skills without truly valuing them. Now, suddenly, those same people were listening. The question was, what would he do with their attention once he had it? The Newport Naval Station buzzed with unusual energy as James and Scott made their way through security checkpoints. Word had spread about the civilian plumber who had solved the Defender's mysterious contamination problem, and curious glances followed them across the base. "Everyone's staring," Scott whispered, clutching his toolbox nervously. "Just focus on why we're here," James advised, nodding to the young ensign assigned to escort them. They were led to a conference room where a dozen naval engineers waited, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. Commander Parker stood at the front, beside a large whiteboard. "Gentlemen, this is James Harmon and his apprentice Scott Bailey," Parker announced. "As you've been briefed, Mr. Harmon identified the source of the contamination issues affecting the Defender and potentially other vessels in the fleet." Lieutenant Woods entered, carrying a stack of technical manuals. She placed them on the table and gave James an encouraging nod. "Mr. Harmon has agreed to consult with us on implementing a fleet-wide solution," Parker continued. "I expect everyone to put aside any preconceptions and listen carefully." A middle-aged man in civilian clothes raised his hand. "Commander, with all due respect, we've been working on these systems for years. How could a—" He hesitated, searching for a diplomatic word. "A tradesman identify something we've missed?" Before Parker could respond, James stepped forward. "That's a fair question. Mind if I answer it?" Parker gestured for him to proceed. James picked up a marker and approached the whiteboard. "I'm going to draw 2 versions of the same water system. This first one is how your blueprints show it. Isolated, perfectly contained, with clear boundaries between subsystems." His hand moved confidently, sketching a series of pipes, valves, and tanks with remarkable precision. "This is the system on paper," James explained, "but here's the reality. He began a second drawing, similar but with subtle differences, micro-fractures at connection points, pressure differentials indicated by arrows, areas where seemingly separate systems influenced each other. In the real world, no system is truly isolated, James continued. Water, air, pressure, they interact in ways blueprints don't always capture. When you've spent 30 years crawling through crawl spaces and opening walls to find leaks, you start to see these hidden connections. The room had fallen silent, all eyes on his drawing. The valve failure in the atmospheric system created negative pressure here, James pointed. Over time, that pulled contaminants through microfractures in the shared bulkhead. Once contamination began, it spread through the purification system, making it appear as if that was the source of the problem. One of the younger engineers leaned forward. But our diagnostics should have caught that pressure differential. Your diagnostics check individual components against specifications, James explained. They don't always capture how those components interact under real-world stress. Think about it like blood pressure. A doctor doesn't just check your arm. They consider how your whole circulatory system is functioning. Understanding began to dawn on faces around the room. James continued, explaining his proposed solution, a redesigned valve housing with improved pressure compensation and reinforced bulkheads at critical junction points. As the briefing concluded, the initial skepticism had largely transformed into respectful attention. Engineers clustered around James, asking questions about his approach, while Scott watched with undisguised admiration. Commander Parker approached as the group dispersed. That went better than expected. You have a gift for explanation, Mr. Harmon. Comes from training apprentices, James replied. You learn to break down complex ideas. Admiral Fletcher would like to see you, Parker said. He's arranged for you both to be on the Defender tomorrow when we test the implementation of your solution. As they followed Parker through the base, Scott whispered, This is insane. Yesterday, I was fixing Mrs. Wilson's garbage disposal. Today, I'm going inside a nuclear submarine. James smiled at his apprentice's excitement, but felt his own nervousness growing. The stakes were much higher here than in residential plumbing. Lives and national security depended on getting this right. Admiral Fletcher was waiting in his office with Chief Petty Officer Reyes and a civilian James didn't recognize. A square-jawed man in an expensive suit. Mr. Harmon, excellent presentation. Fletcher greeted him. Word is, you've won over even our most skeptical engineers. They just needed to see the problem differently, James said modestly. Fletcher gestured to the unknown man. This is Warren Curtis, former submarine captain, now working with our civilian contractors on maintenance protocols. Curtis extended his hand. Impressive work, Harmon. Not often we see someone from outside the naval community solve a problem of this magnitude. I understand you'll be joining us on the Defender tomorrow, Fletcher continued. We're implementing your solution on the primary system first, followed by the auxiliary systems if all goes well. What about the other submarines in the fleet? James asked. Curtis nodded approvingly at the question. We're developing an implementation schedule based on maintenance rotations. The Resolute is already scheduled for maintenance next week in Portsmouth. We'd like you there as well. James glanced at Scott, considering their workload back in Port Haven. We can make that work. Excellent, Fletcher said. Now, there's another matter to discuss. Roland Fitzgerald is moving quickly on the apprenticeship program. He's called a press conference for Friday and would like you there. James frowned. I'm not comfortable with publicity, Admiral. Understandable, but this program could help countless young people enter the trades. Your presence would lend it credibility. James thought of the opportunity this represented for kids like Scott, young people with talent but limited resources. One appearance, he conceded reluctantly, but I won't become Fitzgerald's promotional tool. Fletcher seemed to respect this boundary. Fair enough. Now, let's discuss the implementation details for tomorrow. The next morning found James and Scott aboard the USS Defender, deep in its mechanical systems. They wore Navy-issued coveralls, their names hastily stenciled across the breast pockets. Lieutenant Woods led them through the narrow corridors to the atmospheric control section, where the failed valve had been replaced. "We've implemented your design modifications," Woods explained, pointing to the newly installed valve housing. "The bulkhead reinforcement is complete as well." James examined the work carefully, checking connections and pressure gauges. "Looks good. When do we start the system test?" 30 minutes. Commander Parker wants a full diagnostic before we activate both systems simultaneously. Chief Petty Officer Reyes joined them, carrying clipboard. "Mr. Harmon, we've prepared a checklist based on your recommendations. Would you verify it's complete?" As James reviewed the checklist, Scott explored the adjacent compartment under Wood's supervision, asking questions about the submarine's plumbing systems. "Your apprentice is eager to learn," Woods observed when she returned. James nodded proudly. "Scott's had a rough life, but he's got a natural talent for this work. Sees things others miss, like his mentor," she replied with a smile. The intercom crackled. "Lieutenant Woods, report to control. System test beginning in 10 minutes. The atmosphere grew tense as they gathered in the control room. "Commander," Parker stood before a bank of monitors, displaying system diagnostics. Captain Warren Curtis had arrived to observe the test, standing beside Admiral Fletcher. "All personnel stand by for simultaneous activation of atmospheric control and water purification systems," Parker announced. "Mr. Harmon, would you like to verify the starting parameters?" James stepped forward, checking the baseline pressure readings on both systems. "Parameters look good, Commander." Parker nodded. "Initiate startup sequence." A young technician began the process, fingers moving confidently over controls. James watched the pressure gauges intently, particularly the readings at the junction between the two systems where the problem had originated. The first minute passed without incident, then 2. The room remained silent except for the occasional status update from the technician. At the 5-minute mark, Parker turned to James. "Pressure differentials are holding steady within acceptable ranges. No sign of cross-contamination." James allowed himself a small smile. "Let's check the physical junction point to be certain." He, Scott, and Woods returned to the atmospheric control section. James carefully inspected the reinforced bulkhead and modified valve housing. Everything remained dry and stable. "It's holding," he confirmed, genuine relief in his voice. When they returned to the control room, the test had reached the 30-minute mark with no issues detected. A cautious optimism filled the air. "I believe we can call this a successful implementation," Parker announced finally. "Mr. Harmon, your solution appears to be working precisely as predicted." Admiral Fletcher extended his hand. "Outstanding work. This will save the Navy millions in future maintenance costs and prevent potential mission failures." The rest of the day passed in a blur of technical discussions and planning meetings for implementing the solution across the fleet. By evening, James was exhausted but satisfied as he and Scott drove back to their temporary Navy lodgings. "That was incredible," Scott said, still energized by the experience. "The way they all listened to you, even the commanders and engineers." "Knowledge is knowledge," James replied. "Doesn't matter where it comes from if it solves the problem." "Do you think I could ever do something like this?" Scott asked hesitantly. James glanced at his apprentice. "You've got the mind for it. Keep learning. Keep observing how systems work together instead of just following instructions. That's the difference between a technician and a problem solver." Back at their quarters, James found a message waiting. Lauren had called. He returned the call immediately. "Dad," she answered excitedly, "I just saw the news. They're talking about you fixing the submarine on Portland Channel 6. James groaned. How did they get the story already? Roland Fitzgerald gave an interview about the new apprenticeship program. He mentioned the bet and how you won it by fixing a problem Navy engineers couldn't solve. That man moves fast, James muttered. Are you really going to a press conference with him on Friday? Lauren asked. Unfortunately, it's for a good cause, though. I've taken Friday off, Lauren said. I'm coming to Newport to see you. James felt a wave of gratitude. That would be wonderful, honey. Things are happening so quickly here. Dad, Lauren hesitated, her voice softening. I'm really proud of you, but are you doing okay with all this attention? I know it's not your style. James considered the question, staring out the window at the naval base lights. It's uncomfortable, he admitted. But something important is happening here beyond just fixing a submarine. There's recognition of a kind of knowledge that's often overlooked. If my being uncomfortable helps change that, I can tolerate it. The conversation shifted to logistics for Lauren's visit, and after they hung up, James sat quietly for a while, processing everything that had happened in just 3 days. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mr. Harmon, this is Diana Wells from the Portland Press-Herald. Would you be available for an interview about your remarkable work on the USS Defender? Before he could decide how to respond, another message arrived from a different number. James Harmon? Bob Thompson, Boston Globe, interested in your story for our Sunday features section, and then another and another. Within minutes, his phone was flooded with media requests. James set the phone aside, suddenly overwhelmed. This wasn't what he had wanted. He'd fixed the submarine because it was a fascinating technical challenge and because winning the bet meant creating opportunities for young people in the trades. He never sought fame or attention. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Scott stood there holding his tablet. Mr. Harmon, you need to see this, he said, handing over the device. On the screen was a social media post that had already been shared thousands of times. It showed a stock photo of a submarine with the caption, Navy embarrassed as Plumber fixes critical issue engineers couldn't solve for weeks. Why are we paying for expensive degrees when trade skills get the job done? James sighed deeply. The story was being twisted into something divisive, exactly what he had hoped to avoid. This isn't about engineers versus tradespeople, he told Scott. It's about different kinds of knowledge working together. I couldn't design a submarine, and they can't all have 30 years of hands-on experience with water systems. Scott nodded thoughtfully. So what do we do now? James handed back the tablet. We focus on the work, not the attention. Tomorrow, we're helping implement the solution on more systems. That's what matters, not these headlines. But as Scott left, James wondered if he had lost control of the narrative. Roland Fitzgerald clearly saw promotional value in the story, and now the media was crafting its own version of events. Neither seemed particularly concerned with the truth as James saw it, that solving complex problems required both theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom, working in tandem rather than opposition. Friday's press conference loomed, and with it, James's first real opportunity to shape the public understanding of what had happened. The question was, could a man who had spent his life avoiding the spotlight effectively use it now that it had found him? The following morning, as they prepared to head back to the naval station, James made a decision. He called Admiral Fletcher directly. Admiral, I need a favor, he began. For Friday's press conference, there's something important I want to address, and I need your help to make it happen. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and a brisk ocean breeze. James stood at the window of his temporary quarters, adjusting the unfamiliar weight of a necktie. He had purchased a new suit for the press conference, navy blue, conservative, nothing flashy. His weathered hands looked strange, emerging from the crisp white cuffs. A knock at the door announced Scott, also uncomfortably dressed in a borrowed sports coat and khakis. Ready for this? Scott asked, his usual confidence subdued. Not remotely, James admitted, but we don't always get to choose our challenges. They drove in silence to the conference center where Roland Fitzgerald had arranged the event. The parking lot was filled with news vans, their satellite dishes raised like periscopes against the sky. "There's a lot more media than I expected," James murmured as they approached the entrance. Inside, they found organized chaos. Staff with clipboards directed people through the lobby. Photographers adjusted equipment. Admiral Fletcher stood in conversation with Roland Fitzgerald near a side door, both men in tailored suits that made James's new attire seem pedestrian by comparison. Fletcher spotted them and broke away. "James, good. We've set everything up as you requested. The engineers and technical staff will be seated in the front row. Lieutenant Woods is coordinating with the audio-visual team for your presentation." Fitzgerald approached, beaming. "The man of the hour, James, this is going to be spectacular. We've got representatives from every major network and newspaper in New England. The governor's office even sent someone." James nodded stiffly. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the apprenticeship program, but I want to be clear about something. Today isn't about elevating me or diminishing anyone else. It's about recognizing different forms of expertise." Fitzgerald's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Of course. Just be yourself up there. The authentic, humble tradesman. It's a compelling narrative." Before James could reply, a young woman with a clipboard approached. 5 minutes, gentlemen. We need you backstage." As they walked toward the staging area, James spotted a familiar face in the gathering crowd. Lauren, dressed in a simple blue dress, scanning the room anxiously. He waved and her face lit up as she hurried over. "Dad!" She embraced him warmly. "This is incredible. There are news crews everywhere." "Too many," James grimaced. "But I'm glad you're here." Lauren straightened his tie affectionately. "You look distinguished, very professional." "I feel like I'm wearing a costume," he confessed. "Mr. Harmon," the clipboard woman called, "we really need you backstage now." Lauren squeezed his hand. "You'll do great. Just be yourself." "That's what I'm afraid of," James replied, forcing a smile. Backstage, Roland Fitzgerald reviewed the program with practiced efficiency. "I'll open with remarks about the importance of trade education, then introduce Admiral Fletcher to speak about the submarine situation. He'll introduce you, you'll say a few words about winning the bet and the apprenticeship program, we'll take some photos, and wrap up. Simple." James exchanged glances with Admiral Fletcher, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Actually," James said, "I'd like to use the visual aids we discussed." Fitzgerald frowned. "Visual aids? This is a press conference, not a technical briefing." "It's important," James insisted quietly. "People need to understand what actually happened." Fletcher intervened smoothly. "It's brief, Roland. Adds credibility to the story." Fitzgerald looked unconvinced, but nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but keep it simple. The media needs sound bites, not engineering lectures." Minutes later, they walked onto the stage to bright lights and the click of cameras. The conference room was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls. James spotted Scott and Lauren seated together in the second row, both looking nervous but supportive. Fitzgerald approached the podium with practiced confidence, his voice filling the room without apparent effort. "Good morning and thank you for coming. Today marks the launch of the Fitzgerald Harmon Trade Scholarship Program, an initiative that will provide full funding for promising students to pursue careers in the skilled trades." James half listened as Fitzgerald delivered a polished speech about the importance of trades and his company's commitment to education. It sounded sincere enough, though James suspected the billionaire's motivations were more complex than simple. Philanthropy. Admiral Fletcher spoke next, providing a carefully sanitized account of the submarine incident, emphasizing James's contribution while avoiding classified details. And so I present to you James Harmon, whose exceptional expertise solved a critical issue affecting our naval capabilities. The audience applauded as James approached the podium, acutely aware of the cameras tracking his movement. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "Thank you, Admiral Fletcher," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "I'm not accustomed to public speaking, so I hope you'll bear with me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Over the past week, I've seen news stories framing what happened as a victory of practical trades over formal education. That's not what this is about, and it's not why I'm standing here today." From the corner of his eye, he saw Fitzgerald shift uncomfortably. James continued, gesturing to the screen behind him, where an image now appeared. His whiteboard drawing. From the engineering briefing, what happened on the USS Defender wasn't about a plumber being smarter than engineers. It was about different perspectives, seeing the same problem differently. The Navy's engineers are exceptional at what they do. They designed systems I could never conceive of, but after 30 years of fixing water problems in every setting imaginable, I've developed a different kind of insight. He clicked to the next image, a side-by-side comparison of the theoretical system design and the real-world implementation with its hidden interactions. This is the difference between theory and practice, between design and implementation. Both kinds of knowledge are essential. Neither is superior. They complement each other. Cameras clicked rapidly as journalists scribbled notes. James saw Lieutenant Woods nodding in the front row, alongside several engineers from the briefing. The scholarship program we're announcing today isn't about steering young people away from college education. It's about creating opportunities for those whose talents and interests lie in the skilled trades. We need both paths. We need engineers, designing systems, and skilled tradespeople implementing and maintaining them. James gestured towards Scott. My apprentice, Scott Bailey, represents the future of trades. He has an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that can't be taught in a classroom. But he also benefits from the theoretical knowledge developed by researchers and engineers. The most effective solutions come when these different forms of expertise work together, not in opposition. The room had grown remarkably still, the usual rustling and murmuring of a press conference, replaced by attentive silence. I took Mr. Fitzgerald's bet not for recognition, but because I saw an opportunity to create pathways for young people like Scott. If this program helps talented individuals find their way into trades that suit their abilities, then it will have succeeded regardless of who gets credit. James stepped back from the podium, expecting Fitzgerald to reclaim control of the event. Instead, Admiral Fletcher approached the microphone. Before we take questions, I'd like to announce that the Navy has established a new civilian technical advisory position specifically for Mr. Harmon. He'll be consulting on practical implementation issues across multiple vessel classes, bringing his unique perspective to our engineering processes. This was news to James, who looked at Fletcher in surprise. The Admiral continued, "Additionally, we're developing a training module based on Mr. Harmon's approach to system integration for both our engineering staff and maintenance personnel." The announcement triggered a flurry of questions from the journalists. Fitzgerald smoothly stepped in, directing the first question to James. "Mr. Harmon, how does it feel to go from local plumber to Navy consultant in less than a week?" James leaned into the microphone. "Honestly, overwhelming. But what matters isn't my personal journey. It's the recognition that knowledge comes in many forms. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from unexpected sources." The questions continued for 20 minutes, about the submarine repair, the scholarship program, and James's background. He answered honestly but carefully, consistently steering away from self-promotion and back to the larger themes of education and opportunity. As the formal portion of the press conference concluded, journalists swarmed the stage. James caught sight of Lauren at the edge of the crowd, her face glowing with pride. He excused himself from a persistent reporter and made his way to her. "You were amazing," she said, embracing him. "So genuine, so you." "I felt like I was going to pass out the entire time," James admitted. "Nobody could tell. You spoke from the heart, and it showed." Before they could continue, Roland Fitzgerald appeared at James's elbow, his expression a careful mask of congeniality. "Quite a speech. Armand, not exactly what we discussed, but effective nonetheless." His tone was pleasant, but James detected a hint of irritation beneath the surface. "I needed to set the record straight," James replied simply. "The plain-spoken truth-teller." Fitzgerald nodded, his business mind already adjusting to this narrative. "It works. The media is eating it up." He glanced at Lauren. "And who is this lovely young woman?" "My daughter, Lauren Harmon," James said proudly. "Lauren, this is Roland Fitzgerald." Lauren shook his hand firmly. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Thank you for establishing the scholarship program." "Pleasure's all mine," Fitzgerald replied smoothly. "Your father's quite the unexpected find. Tell me, did you always know he had such hidden depths?" Lauren's expression cooled slightly. "There's nothing hidden about my father's abilities to those who take the time to look." Fitzgerald raised an eyebrow, clearly unused to such direct responses. "Well said. If you'll excuse me, the governor's representative is waiting." As he walked away, Lauren turned to James. "I don't think he's used to people who aren't impressed by his money." "He's funding the program," James reminded her. "That's what matters." Admiral Fletcher approached next, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man in a civilian suit. "James, excellent speech. This is Walter Hamilton, Deputy Secretary of the Navy. For research and development, he flew in specifically to meet you." Hamilton extended his hand. "Mr. Harmon, remarkable work on the Defender. The Admiral has briefed me on your solution. We'd like to discuss expanding your consulting role beyond the original 6 weeks." Before James could respond, Lauren interjected, "Dad, Scott's trying to get your attention." Scott stood near the exit, gesturing urgently. James excused himself and made his way over, concerned by his apprentice's obvious agitation. "What's wrong?" James asked when he reached him. "Phone call from Port Haven," Scott explained, handing over his cell phone. "Martin Owens says it's urgent." James took the phone, worry creasing his brow. "Martin, what's happening?" His friend's voice came through, tense with stress. "James, we've got trouble at the Riverside retirement home. Major water main break under the foundation. The whole east wing is being evacuated. Have you called Peterson Plumbing?" James asked, naming their largest competitor. "They're swamped with emergency calls all over town." Spring thaw shifted the ground more than usual this year. Multiple breaks everywhere, James thought quickly. Riverside housed over 60 elderly residents, many with limited mobility. A water main break under the foundation could compromise the structural integrity of the building. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he promised. "Has the water been shut off to the building?" "Yes, but that creates its own problems. No water for toilets or kitchens. They're bringing in portable facilities, but it's chaos, James. They need someone who understands the building's systems." James had installed much of the plumbing at Riverside during a renovation 5 years ago. He knew the layout intimately. "I'm leaving now," he said firmly. "Should be there in a few hours. Tell them to clear access to the main junction in the basement. And Martin, thanks for calling." He handed the phone back to Scott, his mind already shifting from submarines and press conferences to the immediate crisis back home. "Problem?" Scott asked, reading his expression. "Big one. We need to get back to Port Haven immediately." They quickly found Lauren and explained the situation. She nodded, understanding immediately. "Go. I'll make your excuses here." James hesitated. "We barely had any time together. "There will be other days," she assured him. "Those people need you more than I do right now." As James and Scott hurried toward the exit, Admiral Fletcher intercepted them. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, concerned. "Emergency back home," James explained quickly. "Water main break at a retirement home. I need to get there." Fletcher nodded, without hesitation. "Take my helicopter. It can have you in Port Haven in 40 minutes instead of 3 hours driving." James stared at him in surprise. A Navy helicopter for a water main break? For the man who saved the Defender? Fletcher corrected. "One call and it's done." 20 minutes later, as the helicopter lifted off, James looked down at the naval base receding below them. Just days ago, he had been an anonymous plumber fixing leaky faucets and clogged drains. Now he was flying in a Navy helicopter after speaking at a press conference covered by national media. Yet he felt more himself at this moment than he had all week. Heading toward a practical problem he knew how to solve, tools ready, mind focused on the task ahead, rather than cameras and microphones. Scott shouted over the rotor noise, "Is this real life? A Navy helicopter to fix a water main?" James smiled. Despite his concern for the retirement home residents, "The pipes don't care how we arrive, Scott. They just need fixing." As they flew north toward Port Haven, James reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. The submarine repair had opened doors he never imagined possible, but the true test of his skills and character waited in the flooded basement of a retirement home where elderly residents needed their water restored. Fame was fleeting and often meaningless. Solving real problems for real people, that was the work that mattered. That was the legacy he wanted to build. The Navy helicopter touched down in the baseball field behind Port Haven High School, drawing a crowd of stunned onlookers. James and Scott jumped out, ducking beneath the whirling rotors, toolboxes in hand. Mayor Frank Wilson waited at the edge of the field with his pickup truck, eyes wide at the military aircraft. "When they said you were coming by helicopter, I thought they were joking," the mayor shouted over the noise as the aircraft lifted off again. "Long story," James replied, tossing his toolbox into the truck bed. "How bad is it at Riverside?" "Basement's got 4 feet of water. They've evacuated 30 residents from the East Wing. Building inspectors worried about foundation damage. They sped through town, passing familiar streets that now seemed strangely different to James after his week away. Port Haven had never felt small to him before, but now, fresh from Newport and the enormous naval complex, the coastal town's modest buildings and narrow streets carried a new perspective. Riverside Retirement Home sat on a bluff overlooking the harbor, a sprawling 2-story structure built in the 1960s and expanded several times since. Emergency vehicles crowded the parking lot. Elderly residents in wheelchairs and walkers clustered under a temporary shelter attended by staff and volunteers. Martin Owens met them at the service entrance, his normally cheerful face drawn with worry. "Thank God you're here. The water main rupture is under the East Wing foundation, buildings settling as we speak." Inside, they found organized chaos. The maintenance staff had deployed every available pump, but water continued to pour into the basement from beneath the concrete floor. The building supervisor, Bill Jenkins, stood ankle-deep in murky water, directing volunteers. "James," he called with palpable relief. "We can't keep up with it. Every time we pump out a section, more water pushes through." James handed his suit jacket to Scott and rolled up his sleeves, surveying the scene with practiced efficiency. "Show me the main junction box." Jenkins led them to a section of the basement where the floor had partially collapsed, revealing the fractured water main. Beneath, the 8-inch pipe had split lengthwise, unleashing a torrent directly under the building's foundation. "City shut off the supply from the street," Jenkins explained, "but there's still pressure in the line from the hill reservoir. One-way valves. are preventing backflow shutdown. James knelt at the edge of the collapsed section, studying the pipe and surrounding soil. We need to expose more of the pipe to see the full extent of the damage. Get me a submersible pump for this section, and have someone bring in 4 support jacks from the maintenance shed. Scott had already changed into work clothes from his emergency bag. What do you need me to do? Call Peterson Plumbing, James instructed. See if they can spare anyone to help. Then go to Martin's hardware store and get everything on this list. He quickly scribbled materials on a notepad and tore off the page. As Scott departed, James waded into the water, following the line of the broken pipe. Despite the crisis atmosphere, he felt a familiar calm settle over him, the focused state that came with tackling a challenging problem with clear parameters. This was his element. For the next 3 hours, James orchestrated a complex emergency repair operation. Under his direction, volunteers and maintenance staff stabilized the damaged foundation with hydraulic jacks, diverted the water flow with temporary channels, and finally exposed the full length of the ruptured main. The actual pipe repair was complex but straightforward for someone with James's experience, a combination of mechanical coupling, reinforced sleeve, and pressure reduction assembly that would hold until a permanent replacement could be installed. By early evening, the water had been pumped out, the leak contained, and emergency service restored to most of the building. As James emerged from the basement, exhausted and soaked, the facility director, Helen Bradshaw, waited with tears in her eyes. "You saved our home," she said simply. "The building inspector says if you hadn't stabilized that foundation when you did, we might have lost the entire east wing." James shook his head modestly. "Just doing my job, Helen." "No," she insisted. "Every other plumber said it would take days to fix. You did it in hours. How can we ever thank you?" "Let me take a shower in one of the vacant rooms," James smiled, gesturing to his mud-covered clothes. "That'll be thanks enough. Later." Cleaned up and wearing borrowed scrubs from the facility's medical staff, James sat in the dining hall, where the staff had prepared a hasty meal for the response team. Scott joined him, equally exhausted but grinning. "That was amazing," his apprentice said, dropping into a chair. "The way you redesigned that junction assembly on the fly, I've never seen anything like it." "Necessity and experience," James replied, sipping gratefully at hot coffee. "When you've been doing this long enough, you develop a mental catalogue of solutions." Mayor Wilson approached their table, accompanied by a tall woman in a business suit, whom James recognized as State Representative Caroline Davis. "James Harmon," Wilson began formally, "Port Haven owes you a debt of gratitude today. First a nuclear submarine, now our retirement home. You're becoming quite the hero." James shifted uncomfortably. "Just a plumber doing his job, Frank." Representative Davis extended her hand. "Mr. Harmon, I've just come from speaking with the facility directors. They tell me your quick action saved the state millions in potential reconstruction costs, not to mention protecting our most vulnerable citizens." "Anyone with the right experience would have done the same," James insisted. "But no one else did have that experience," she countered. "That's precisely my point. For years, I've been pushing legislation to increase funding for trade education in our state. Stories like yours illustrate exactly why." James thought of the Fitzgerald Harmon Scholarship and realized an opportunity when he saw one. "I'd be interested in hearing more about your initiatives, Representative. As it happens, I'm now involved with a new trade scholarship program." Davis's eyes lit up. "I've heard about that. The press conference was all over the news this morning. Would you be willing to speak at a state education committee hearing next month? Your perspective could be invaluable." Before James could answer, his phone rang. Admiral Fletcher calling for an update. "Excuse me," James said, stepping away to take the call. "Harmon, how's the situation at the retirement home?" Fletcher asked without preamble. "Under control," James reported. Emergency repairs are complete. They'll need a permanent replacement for the main, but the building is secure and services are restored. Excellent work. I've spoken with your daughter. Impressive young woman, by the way. She's handling the aftermath of the press conference admirably. Fitzgerald is talking about expanding the scholarship program nationally. James felt a mixture of pride and concern. That's moving awfully fast. Opportunity rarely waits for convenience. James, the Navy still needs you down here. When can you return? James looked across the dining hall at Scott, who was now engaged in animated conversation with the mayor and state representative, explaining the repair process with growing confidence. He'd handled himself superbly during the emergency, anticipating needs and applying techniques he'd learned. Tomorrow afternoon, James decided. I need to check on a few critical customers in the morning and make arrangements for ongoing coverage of my business. Understood. By the way, the Resolute repairs are scheduled for Monday at Portsmouth. Your presence is requested. After ending the call, James rejoined the group, where Scott was now sketching the repair solution on a napkin for Representative Davis. So instead of replacing the entire section, Mr. Harmon created this coupling assembly that accommodates the pressure differential while supporting the compromised foundation. James smiled, recognizing his own teaching methods in Scott's thorough explanation. The young man had been paying attention all these years, absorbing not just techniques, but underlying principles. Scott, James interrupted gently, how would you feel about handling the Wilson and Parkman jobs tomorrow morning while I deal with paperwork? They're both straightforward installations. Scott straightened, recognizing the significance of the offer. These were regular, reliable customers, homeowners, who typically insisted on James personally handling their plumbing needs. I can handle it, he said confidently. I know you can, James nodded, and I need to talk with you about the next few weeks. The Navy still needs me in Newport, and there's another submarine repair scheduled in Portsmouth on Monday. Mayor Wilson raised his eyebrows. Sounds like Port Haven might be losing its best plumber to the military. Temporarily, James clarified. This is still my home, and these are still my customers. Scott will manage the business with help from Peterson Plumbing for emergency backup. Later that evening, as James drove Scott home in Martin's borrowed truck, the young apprentice was uncharacteristically quiet. Something on your mind? James prompted. Scott hesitated. Do you think I'm ready to run things while you're gone? I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't, James replied honestly. You've been with me 3 years now. You know the customers, the systems, the common problems. What you don't know, you can figure out with the foundation I've given you. But what if something comes up that I can't handle? James considered this. Then you call Peterson for backup, or you call me. There's no shame in asking for help when you need it. That's another part of the trade, knowing your limits. At Scott's apartment, James lingered a moment after parking. There's something else we should discuss. The scholarship program is moving forward quickly. Fitzgerald's talking about taking it national. Scott leaned forward, interested. That's amazing. Think of how many kids could benefit. I want you involved, James said, not just as a recipient, but eventually as an instructor. You have a gift for explaining things clearly. I've seen it today with the mayor and state representative. Me? An instructor? Scott looked genuinely surprised. I'm still learning myself. The best teachers always are, James replied. Think about it. This program could create a pathway for kids who might otherwise slip through the cracks. Kids like you were before we met. Scott nodded slowly, understanding the significance. I'd be honored, but I still have a lot to learn from you. And you will, James assured him. This Navy consulting work is temporary, but the changes happening around trade education could be permanent. We both have a role to play. That night, back in his own house for the first time in days, James sat at his kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, customer records, invoices, schedule notes for Scott. The familiar surroundings felt both comforting and somehow different, as if he were seeing his life through new eyes. His phone rang. Lauren. Calling? "Hey, Dad, just checking you made it home safely. The helicopter evacuation was quite dramatic." James chuckled. "Bit excessive for a water main break, but it got me there in time." "Admiral Fletcher told me what happened. Sounds like you saved that retirement home." "Just did what needed doing," James demurred. "How are things there after the press conference?" Lauren's voice brightened. "You've become quite the celebrity. Fitzgerald has been fielding calls from national media and education organizations all afternoon. The scholarship program is taking off faster than anyone expected." "That's good news," James said, genuinely pleased despite his reservations about the publicity. The opportunity for kids to learn trades without crushing debt, that's what matters. "He wants to fly you to Washington next month to meet with the Secretary of Labor," Lauren continued. "There's talk of using the program as a model for a national initiative." James sighed, feeling the weight of new responsibilities pressing against his desire for a quiet life. "I'm just a plumber, Lauren. All this attention feels wrong somehow." "Dad," her voice softened, "you're not just a plumber. You never were. You're someone who solves problems others can't, who sees connections others miss. The world needs more of that perspective, not less." After they hung up, James walked through his modest home, touching familiar objects. The worn leather chair, where he read technical manuals in the evenings, the kitchen table scarred from years of drawing out designs and solutions, the family photos on the wall tracking Lauren's growth from toddler to accomplished young woman. His life had been shaped by pipes and pressure, by the physical laws governing water and air. Simple, predictable principles applied with careful attention to detail. The human world was messier, less predictable, governed by egos and agendas rather than physical laws. Yet somehow, his straightforward approach to problem-solving had proven equally effective there. By simply focusing on the technical challenge of the submarine, by being truthful about what he knew and what he didn't, he had navigated a complex social and political situation more effectively than if he'd tried to be strategic. Perhaps that was the real lesson here, James reflected. The principles that guided his work could guide his newfound public role as well. Identify the real problem beneath the symptoms, understand how systems interact, respect the expertise of others while contributing his own, and always focus on practical solutions rather than personal credit. Tomorrow, he would return to Newport to continue his work with the Navy. The submarine repairs would be challenging but clear-cut compared to the broader changes unfolding around trade education and his unexpected public platform. James closed his worn notebook containing 30 years of technical notes and solutions. Whatever came next, Washington meetings, national initiatives, or simply returning to fixing Port Haven's pipes, he would approach it as he had always approached his work, with honesty, attention to detail, and respect for the fundamental principles that governed both mechanical systems and human relationships. Some problems required a wrench, others required words. The tools might differ, but the underlying approach remained the same. Identify what's broken, understand why it failed, and fix it with integrity. As James prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a final message of the day, a text from Scott, including photos of the completed riverside repair and a simple note. "Couldn't have done this without everything you taught me. Thanks for believing in me." That, James thought as he drifted off to sleep, was the legacy that mattered most. Not submarines or press conferences or government initiatives, but the knowledge passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that valuable skills remained alive in capable hands. The Portsmouth Naval Shipyard bustled with activity as James walked alongside Commander Warren Curtis, both men in hard hats and safety vests. 3 weeks had passed since the Riverside emergency, and James had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Weekdays consulting with the Navy, weekends back in Port Haven checking on his business and customers. The Resolute implementation went even. Better than the Defender, Curtis noted, reviewing diagnostic reports on his tablet. Contamination levels dropped by 87% within the first 12 hours. The modified valve design is working perfectly. James nodded, satisfied, but not surprised. The reinforced bulkhead was the key improvement. It prevents microfractures from developing even under maximum pressure differentials. They entered a large conference room where Lieutenant Christine Woods waited with a team of engineers. A model of the modified valve system, built to James's specifications, occupied the center of the table. "Perfect timing," Woods greeted them. "Pentagon's on the line for the briefing." A large screen displayed a video conference with Admiral Fletcher and several high-ranking officials James didn't recognize. Fletcher acknowledged him with a nod. "Gentlemen, James Harmon, our civilian consultant who developed the solution." "James, we're joined by Rear Admiral Thompson from Naval Sea Systems Command and Captain Miller from the Office of Naval Research." James listened as Woods and Curtis presented the technical data from the Resolute implementation, occasionally adding clarification. When questions arose about the practical application of the modified design, the Navy had embraced his solution with surprising speed, already implementing it on 4 submarines, with 8 more scheduled. "Manufacturing costs?" asked Rear Admiral Thompson, a grey-haired man with piercing eyes. 17% higher than the original components, Curtis replied, but the maintenance savings over the life cycle will exceed that by a factor of 10, not counting the operational readiness improvements. "Mr. Harmon," Thompson addressed him directly, "I understand you've declined the patent rights to this design modification." James shifted uncomfortably, aware of all eyes on the screen focusing on him. "Yes, sir. The Navy should own the implementation. I just provided the concept." "Highly unusual," Thompson remarked. "Most civilian consultants would have leveraged that intellectual property." "I'm not most consultants," James replied simply. "I'm a plumber who happened to see a problem from a different angle." After the briefing concluded, Woods approached him with undisguised curiosity. "You really turned down the patent? That could have been worth millions over time." James shrugged. "Money's never been my primary motivation. Besides, the design builds on work your engineers had already done. I just connected existing ideas differently." Woods studied him with newfound respect. "The humility isn't an act, is it? You genuinely—" "Don't care about the credit. I care about solving problems," James corrected her. "The submarines are fixed. The system is improved. That's what matters." Later that afternoon, as James prepared to drive back to Newport, his phone rang, Roland Fitzgerald calling. "James, excellent news. The Labor Department is fully on board with expanding the scholarship program. They're proposing matching funds for states that implement our model." "That's good to hear," James replied, genuinely pleased, despite his lingering wariness of Fitzgerald's promotional approach. "We need you in Washington next Thursday," Fitzgerald continued. "Meeting with the Congressional Education Subcommittee. Your testimony could be crucial for securing the federal component." James hesitated. His 6-week Navy consulting period was nearly complete, but he had promised several Port Haven customers he would personally handle their projects once he returned full-time. "I'm not sure I can make Thursday work," he began. "James," Fitzgerald's voice took on an edge of impatience. "This is bigger than fixing pipes in Port Haven. We're talking about a national program that could change thousands of lives. Surely your local customers can wait another day." The dismissive tone toward his regular work irritated James. "Those Local customers have supported my business for decades, Mr. Fitzgerald. They deserve the same respect as any senator or secretary. A pause, then Fitzgerald's voice softened apologetically. You're absolutely right, forgive me. What if we arrange the meeting for Friday instead? Would that work better with your schedule? Friday afternoon could work, James allowed. I'll need to check with Scott about our customer commitments. Perfect. My assistant will coordinate the details. Fitzgerald's enthusiasm returned full force. Oh, and the Today Show wants to interview you next week. Morning segment, national exposure for the program. Television? James balked. That seems excessive. It's essential, Fitzgerald countered. Public support drives political action. Your story resonates with people, James. The humble plumber whose practical wisdom solved a problem that stumped naval engineers. It's compelling narrative. After ending the call, James sat in his truck, feeling increasingly pulled between worlds. The local plumber who fixed pipes and mentored Scott seemed increasingly distant from the man flying to Washington for congressional testimony and television appearances. His phone rang again, Scott calling with his weekly business update. Everything's running smoothly, his apprentice reported. Finished the Miller bathroom renovation yesterday. Mrs. Parker's water heater installation is scheduled for tomorrow. Any problems, James asked. Nothing major. Had to call Peterson for backup on the Thompson job. Cast iron drain pipe cracked during removal. Thought it best to get a second opinion before proceeding. Good call, James approved. Always better to get help when you're uncertain. How's it going with the Navy? Scott asked. Still saving submarines? James smiled despite his conflicted feelings. The implementation is going well. The modified design works even better than expected. When are you coming home for good? There was a note of both hope and worry in Scott's voice. Customers keep asking. My consulting term ends next Friday, James assured him. After that, we have the Washington meeting, then it's back to regular business. He paused. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility when I return? Leading jobs independently, while I handle overall management? Seriously? Scott sounded surprised, but pleased. I'd be honored. Do you think I'm ready? More than ready, James confirmed. These weeks have proven it. You've handled everything I've thrown at you. The conversation shifted to specific customer details, but James's mind remained partly on the Washington trip. The program was expanding beyond anything he had imagined when he accepted Fitzgerald's bet. What had begun as a local educational opportunity was becoming a national policy initiative, with his name and story attached. That evening, in his temporary housing at Newport, James called Lauren. Their relationship had strengthened over these unusual weeks, with regular calls and weekend visits when her research schedule permitted. Dad, I was just about to call you, she answered cheerfully. I've got news. I've been invited to present at the Marine Biology Symposium in Boston next month. That's wonderful, James said, genuine pride warming his voice. Your research on coastal ecosystem preservation is getting the recognition it deserves. Partly thanks to you, Lauren replied. Remember that leak in our lab's seawater circulation system last year that nobody could fix? Your solution is now cited in our methodology section, proper water flow maintenance as a critical factor in research validity. James chuckled. Plumbing making it into academic journals. Now I've heard everything. That's my point, Dad. Your knowledge isn't just practical, it's valuable across disciplines. Academic researchers sometimes miss the fundamentals that you understand intuitively. Her words echoed what he had been trying to articulate about the trade scholarship program, the complementary nature of different forms of expertise, each essential in its own context. Speaking of recognition, Lauren continued, I saw the announcement about the Washington meeting. Congressional testimony is a big deal. Too big, maybe, James admitted. I'm a plumber from Maine, not a policy expert. That's exactly why they need you. Lauren insisted. Policy experts have plenty of theories, but limited real-world experience. You bring a perspective they rarely hear. After they hung up, James opened his laptop to review materials Fitzgerald had sent for the Washington trip. The scholarship program overview was impressive in its scope and ambition. Full funding for qualified students in plumbing, electrical, HVAC, construction, and automotive trades, with built-in apprenticeship placements and job transition support. What had begun as a bet-winning prize had evolved into something James could genuinely believe in, addressing both the shortage of skilled tradespeople and the financial barriers preventing talented young people from entering these critical fields. A knock at his door interrupted his reading. Commander Curtis stood in the hallway, holding a thick folder. "Sorry to disturb you, James. We've received the final analysis from the systems integration team. Thought you'd want to see it." James invited him in, and Curtis spread the documents on the table, detailed performance metrics from all the submarines where the modified valve design had been implemented. "Results are even better than projected," Curtis explained, pointing to key data points. "The Navy's implementing your solution fleet-wide, not just on Virginia-class, but across all submarine classes where the shared housing design exists." James studied the numbers, satisfaction warming his chest. This was tangible proof that his insight had made a meaningful difference, not in theory, but in practical, measurable results. "There's more," Curtis continued. "Admiral Fletcher asked me to discuss extending your consulting role. The submarine issue is largely resolved, but there are other naval systems that might benefit from your perspective. Shore-based water management, aircraft carrier desalination systems, even some specialized hydraulic applications." James looked up, surprised. "I'm scheduled to return to my business full-time next week." "This would be different," Curtis explained. "Not full-time, but periodic consulting, perhaps 1 week per month, addressing specific challenges as they arise. You'd maintain your business while contributing your expertise when needed." The offer was tempting. The work was intellectually stimulating in ways that standard residential plumbing rarely matched. Yet James hesitated, thinking of his commitment to Port Haven and his customers. "I'd need to consider how it would affect my business," he said, carefully. "My apprentice has managed well, but my customers expect me to be available." "Of course," Curtis nodded. "The Navy understands the value of your local commitments. That's partly why we respect your perspective. You're grounded in practical realities our full-time engineers sometimes miss." Later that night, unable to sleep, James stood at his window overlooking the darkened naval base. The silhouettes of ships and submarines were barely visible against the night sky, massive technological achievements representing billions in investment and thousands of specialized careers. Yet his simple insight about pressure differentials and microfractures, knowledge gained from decades of mundane residential plumbing work, had solved a problem that had stumped all that specialized expertise. There was a lesson there, one that extended beyond submarines to education policy and societal values. Different forms of knowledge and experience weren't hierarchical, but complementary. The theoretical understanding of engineers and the practical wisdom of tradespeople both had essential roles to play in solving complex problems. Perhaps that was his real contribution to the scholarship program and upcoming congressional testimony. Not just advocating for trade education funding, but helping bridge the artificial divide between different types of expertise. The following morning, James called Scott with a new proposal. "I'm considering accepting a part-time Navy consulting role," he explained. 1 week per month, with scheduling flexibility for our business needs." "That sounds ideal," Scott replied enthusiastically. "You get to work on complex systems while still maintaining the business." "It would mean more responsibility for you," James cautioned. "You'd effectively manage operations whenever I'm consulting." "I can handle it," Scott assured him. "These weeks have taught me I'm capable of more than I thought." "Good," James said, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Because I have another proposition. How would you feel about becoming a partner in the business, rather than just an employee? Harmon and Bailey Plumbing has a nice ring to it." The stunned silence on the other end of the line made James smile. "Are you serious?" Scott finally managed. "Completely serious. You've earned it with your work these past weeks. We'd structure it as a gradual buy-in over 5 years, so it's financially manageable for you." "I don't know what to say." Scott's voice cracked slightly. "This is more than I ever expected." "Well, don't decide immediately," James advised. "Think it through carefully. Partnership is a big commitment." "I don't need to think about it," Scott replied firmly. "It's a yes. Absolutely yes." After they hung up, James felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The business partnership offered Scott the security and professional recognition he deserved, while ensuring James could accept the Navy consulting role without abandoning his community commitments. His phone buzzed with a text from Fitzgerald. "Transportation arranged for Washington. Car will collect you Thursday afternoon. Press briefing before congressional testimony. Bring your A game." James sighed at the promotional language, but replied with a simple acknowledgement. The Washington trip represented yet another step into unfamiliar territory, but he felt more prepared for it now. He understood his role, not as a policy expert or public figure, but as a tradesman whose practical experience could inform decisions affecting thousands of future workers. As he packed his tools for that day's submarine inspection, James reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since fixing Roland Fitzgerald's golden faucet just 1 month earlier. The submarine repair had opened doors he never imagined possible, creating opportunities not just for himself, but for Scott, for young people entering the trades, and potentially for how society valued different forms of knowledge. Not bad for a plumber from Port Haven, Maine. Washington, D.C. gleamed in the late morning sun as James gazed through the car window at monuments and government buildings passing by. His reflection in the glass showed a man transformed from a month ago, the same weathered face, but now wearing a tailored navy suit, hair neatly trimmed, expression contemplative rather than merely focused. "First time in the capital?" asked the driver, catching James's wide-eyed assessment in the rear-view mirror. "Yes," James admitted. "Never had reason to come before." "Well, you must have a good reason now. Not everyone gets invited to testify before Congress." James nodded silently. The car turned onto a broad avenue lined with imposing buildings, pulling up to a hotel where Roland Fitzgerald waited in the lobby, engaged in animated conversation with a cluster of well-dressed individuals. "James!" Fitzgerald broke away, approaching with hand extended. "Perfect timing. Let me introduce you to some key supporters of our initiative." The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes and conversations. Education policy experts, labor representatives, trade association directors, all eager to meet the plumber whose submarine repair had catalyzed a national movement for trade education reform. "The congressional hearing is at 2, Fitzgerald explained, as they finally escaped to a quiet corner. "Senator Mitchell is chairing. He's sympathetic to our cause, but needs compelling testimony to convince his colleagues. You'll have 5 minutes. For opening remarks, then questions. 5 minutes to summarize 30 years of trade experience," James remarked dryly. "Focus on your journey," Fitzgerald advised. "The submarine story, obviously, but also how your skills developed over time, the barriers you've observed for young people entering trades, and why programs like ours are essential." James nodded, mentally organizing his thoughts. He had prepared extensively, working with Lauren to refine his message without losing his authentic voice. "One other thing," Fitzgerald added, lowering his voice. "The opposition will be present, representatives. from certain four-year universities who see trade education funding as competition for their own programs. They may ask pointed questions. "I'm not here to criticize higher education," James clarified firmly. "Both paths have value." Of course, Fitzgerald agreed quickly. "That balanced perspective is precisely why your testimony carries such weight." After lunch, they arrived at the Congressional Office building where the hearing would take place. The meeting room was smaller than James had imagined from television depictions, but imposing nonetheless with its polished wood panels and formal atmosphere. As they settled into chairs at the witness table, James noticed Admiral Fletcher enter, with Lieutenant Woods, both in dress uniforms. They nodded in acknowledgement before taking seats in the audience section. Gradually, the room filled. Congressional staffers, journalists, representatives from various educational and trade organizations. James was reviewing his notes when he spotted a familiar face entering, Scott, dressed in a suit that still bore the creases of its recent purchase. "Scott?" James called, surprised. "What are you doing here?" His apprentice grinned as he approached. "Lauren arranged it, said I shouldn't miss seeing my boss make history." He gestured toward the door, where Lauren herself now entered, elegant in a simple dress and blazer. The sight of his daughter and apprentice, the two most important people in his life, transformed the intimidating government chamber into something more manageable. Whatever happened here today, he wasn't facing it alone. Lauren hugged him quickly before taking her seat. "Remember what we discussed, Dad. Just be yourself. That's what they need to hear." At precisely 2 o'clock, Senator Mitchell called the hearing to order. After preliminary remarks explaining the purpose, evaluating the proposed Federal Trade Education Partnership Act, he introduced the witnesses. Our first speaker is Mr. James Harmon, master plumber from Port Haven, Maine, whose work with the United States Navy has recently gained national attention. Mr. Harmon, you have 5 minutes for opening remarks. James approached the microphone, took a deep breath, and began speaking, not from his prepared notes, but from the heart. "Thank you, Senator Mitchell and committee members. I'm not a policy expert or professional speaker. I'm a plumber. Have been for 30 years. Every day, I solve problems involving water, pressure, and interconnected systems. A month ago, I had the opportunity to apply that knowledge to a naval submarine, fixing an issue that had confounded highly trained engineers." He paused, looking directly at the senators. That experience wasn't about a plumber being smarter than engineers. It was about different types of knowledge complementing each other. The engineers had theoretical understanding I lack. I had practical experience they hadn't acquired. Together, we solved a problem neither could address alone. James continued, explaining how his career path had developed. Apprenticeship under an experienced plumber, years of hands-on learning, continuous self-education through technical manuals and problem-solving. Today, that path is increasingly closed to young people. Trade schools are expensive. Apprenticeships are scarce. We've created a system where 4-year college is presented as the only legitimate option for success, despite critical shortages in skilled trades and crushing student debt. He gestured towards Scott in the audience. My apprentice, Scott Bailey, represents what's possible when we open doors to trades. 3 years ago, he was unemployed with limited prospects. Today, he's a skilled professional and my future business partner. The scholarship program we're discussing would create similar opportunities nationwide. James concluded by addressing the core misconception he'd encountered since the submarine repair. This isn't about choosing sides between academic education and trade skills. Both are essential. Both create value. We need engineers designing systems and skilled tradespeople implementing and maintaining them. What we lack is respect for how these different forms of knowledge work together and educational pathways that recognize the dignity and value of all types of expertise. As he returned to his seat, the room remained momentarily silent before Senator Mitchell spoke again. "Thank you, Mr. Harmon. We'll now hear from our second witness, Dr. Eleanor Winters, representing the Association of American Universities." Dr. Winters, a polished speaker in her 50s, presented a measured counter-argument, not opposing trade education directly, but questioning the funding allocation and suggesting that existing university programs could expand to incorporate technical training. When question time began, Senator Mitchell addressed James first. "Mr. Harmon, critics suggest that specialized trade programs create educational silos rather than well-rounded citizens. How would you respond?" James considered carefully before answering. "Specialized knowledge doesn't prevent well-rounded development. Senator, my work requires mathematics, physics, chemistry, communication skills, business acumen, and problem-solving creativity. What matters isn't where you learn, but how thoroughly you learn and how effectively you apply that knowledge." A skeptical senator from Arizona pressed harder. "Isn't this program essentially admitting defeat, acknowledging that some young people simply aren't capable of college-level academic work?" James felt a flash of indignation, but kept his tone measured. "With respect, Senator, that perspective misunderstands both trades and education. Many highly intelligent, capable young people choose trades not because they can't handle academic work, but because they excel at spatial reasoning, mechanical comprehension, and hands-on problem-solving. These are different cognitive strengths, not lesser ones." The questioning continued for nearly an hour. Throughout, James maintained his central theme: different types of knowledge and education serving complementary roles, each deserving respect and support. When Dr. Winters suggested that universities could better administer trade programs because of their established educational frameworks, James responded with quiet authority. "Having spent time recently in both worlds, the practical trade environment and the military's advanced technical facilities, I've observed that effective trade education requires instructors with substantial hands-on experience. Theoretical knowledge alone can't develop the intuition and problem-solving approaches these professions demand. The most effective programs will partner academic institutions with experienced tradespeople in the field." As the hearing concluded, Senator Mitchell thanked the witnesses. "This testimony has been exceptionally valuable as we consider this legislation. Mr. Harmon, your perspective in particular offers insights rarely heard in these chambers." Outside in the hallway, Fitzgerald was jubilant. "That was perfect, James. Authentic, compelling, exactly what we needed. Mitchell's aide told me the committee is leaning strongly towards supporting the full funding package." James nodded, but his attention was on Lauren and Scott, who approached with obvious pride. "You were amazing, Dad." Lauren embraced him. "Clear, respectful but firm, you made the case perfectly." "Couldn't have said it better myself," Scott agreed. "You showed them why both kinds of education matter." Admiral Fletcher and Lieutenant Woods joined them, both offering congratulations. "The Navy owes you another debt, James," Fletcher said. "Your testimony helps not just the scholarship program, but our ongoing efforts to emphasize the critical importance of skilled technicians alongside engineers." As the group walked toward the building exit, discussing details of the hearing, James noticed Dr. Winters standing alone, reviewing notes from the session. Making a decision, he excused himself and approached her. "Dr. Winters, I wanted to thank you for your thoughtful testimony. While we may differ on implementation, I believe we share the goal of providing quality education across disciplines." She looked up, surprised but professionally cordial. "Mr. Harmon, yes, indeed. I hope my questions didn't seem antagonistic. My concerns are primarily about fragmentation of educational resources. A valid concern, James acknowledged, which is why I believe partnerships between academic institutions and trade professionals offer the strongest approach, combining theoretical frameworks with practical application. Dr. Winters studied him with newfound interest. You know, several engineering departments have expressed interest in developing precisely such partnerships. Perhaps we could discuss potential pilot programs sometime. I'd welcome that conversation, James replied sincerely. Later that evening, the group celebrated at a restaurant near the hotel. Fitzgerald had arranged a private room where supporters of the scholarship program gathered to toast its progress. James found himself the center of attention, despite his preference for the background. During a quiet moment, Lauren joined him at a corner table. "Penny for your thoughts?" James smiled at his daughter, just trying to process everything. "A month ago, I was fixing Mrs. Davis's leaky shower. Today, I testified before Congress. Life takes unexpected turns," Lauren agreed. "But you've handled it with remarkable grace." "I've had good support," James acknowledged, glancing around the room where Scott was engaged in animated conversation with Lieutenant Woods and several trade association representatives. "Speaking of unexpected turns, Scott told me you two have been talking regularly." Lauren blushed slightly. "He called with questions about your schedule a few weeks back. We got to talking about his apprenticeship, my research. Found we had a lot in common." "He's a good man," James said simply. "I wouldn't have offered him partnership otherwise." "High praise from James Harmon," Lauren smiled. "So what's next after tonight? Back to Port Haven and regular plumbing?" "Not quite regular," James clarified. "I've accepted the Navy's consulting offer, 1 week monthly to work on various water systems across the fleet. The rest of the time, I'll be working with Scott to build our business and helping develop the scholarship program's practical training components." Lauren nodded approvingly. "Sounds like the perfect balance." Across the room, Fitzgerald tapped a glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to James Harmon, the plumber who fixed not just a submarine, but potentially our nation's approach to trade, education." As glasses raised around the room, James felt a peculiar sense of completion. The journey that began with a smug billionaire's bet had evolved into something genuine and meaningful. A program that would help countless young people find their path, a partnership that would secure Scott's future, and a consulting role that would allow him to continue solving interesting problems while maintaining his business. More importantly, the submarine repair had sparked a broader conversation about different types of knowledge and expertise, how they complement rather than compete with each other, and how society benefits when both are valued appropriately. Later that night, as James packed for his return to Maine the following day, his phone buzzed with a message from Scott. "Just got an emergency call from Riverside Retirement Home. Small leak in the new water main connection. Told them we'd check it first thing tomorrow. Partners tackle problems together, right?" James smiled, texting back, "Right, I'll meet you there at 8 a.m. Some things had changed dramatically in his life, but the fundamentals remained constant. Solving problems, mentoring the next generation, serving his community. The submarine repair had opened new doors, but he would walk through them carrying the same toolbox of practical wisdom and hands-on expertise that had guided him for 30 years. As James drifted towards sleep, he reflected that perhaps this was the most important lesson from his unlikely journey. No matter how high you rise or how much recognition you receive, what ultimately matters is staying true to the foundational principles of your craft, whether fixing pipes in a retirement home or addressing systemic issues before Congress. In plumbing and in life, integrity under pressure reveals true character. Everything else is just noise. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.